5 reasons why your thoughts are making you unhappy. 1. You don't control your inner voice and it controls you. The problem. Most people have a constant voice in their head that never stops talking, commenting, and judging everything around them. This voice is completely involuntary. You don't even realize it exists and that it never shuts up. It's like having a radio turned on 24 hours a day inside your mind, broadcasting an endless program of commentary, opinions, interpretations, and judgments about every aspect of your life. Why this makes you unhappy? You have become a slave to your own thoughts. When you say "I think," it's actually not true. You have no control over thinking. It uses you, not the other way around. This inner voice functions like those radio stations where the hosts speak with an animated and exaggerated voice, jumping from one topic to another without stopping. If you went to a foreign country and heard this radio without understanding the language, you might think this must be extremely important. But when you understand what they're saying, you realize it's completely meaningless, just noise. The reality. If we could listen to the inside of everyone's mind on the street, we would be shocked by the internal noise. On the outside, people look normal and sane because they're not talking to themselves out loud. But inside, there's constant mental chaos. A significant part of what happens in your mind, actually the larger part, is just superfluous noise. Thinking is a wonderful ability, an incredible tool when used correctly. But when you don't use thought and are used by it, it becomes an instrument that causes dysfunction and misery for millions of people on the planet. The vicious cycle. This process is compulsive and involuntary. People are so identified with these mental processes that they don't even know they're under the grip of their own thoughts, because they're completely identified with them. They have become their thought processes. That's why when something comes into your head, you believe it completely, without questioning. You say yes, that's right to any narrative your mind creates, no matter how destructive or unrealistic it may be. The consequence. This lack of control over your own thoughts means you're living on a constant emotional roller coaster, where your happiness and well-being depend completely on what this voice decides to comment on at each moment. If it decides to focus on your problems, you become anxious. If it decides to compare your life to others, you become frustrated. If it decides to remember past mistakes, you become depressed. You're not in control. You're just a passenger on this chaotic mental journey. 2. You completely identify with your thoughts. The problem. You are so identified with your mental processes that you can no longer distinguish between yourself and your thoughts. You have become your thoughts. This identification is so deep that you don't even realize there's a possible separation between who you really are and the mental content that arises in your consciousness. It's as if you've completely merged with the mental noise, losing your true identity in the process. Why this makes you unhappy? Anything that arises in your mind, you believe completely. There's no distance between you and the thought. You are the thought. This means that every mental drama becomes your absolute reality. If your mind says you're a failure, you don't question it. You simply accept it as truth. If it says your life is terrible, you don't examine this statement. You live it as if it were an unquestionable fact. The identification trap. When you completely identify with your thoughts, every mental fluctuation becomes a fluctuation in your sense of identity and self-worth. If the thoughts are positive, you feel good. If they're negative, you feel bad. You become a slave to mental oscillations, without realizing there's a deeper you that can observe these thoughts without being defined by them. The result. You live in the prison of your own mind, believing every narrative it creates about your life, your self-esteem, your perception of your worth, your beliefs about your abilities and your future. All of this is at the mercy of what your mind decides to produce at each moment. If it's having a bad day, you have a bad day. If it's creating catastrophic scenarios, you live in fear. If it's ruminating on the past, you live in guilt and regret. The loss of perspective. This total identification prevents you from having any perspective on your own thoughts. You can't see that they're just temporary mental events like clouds passing in the sky. Instead, you treat them as fundamental truths about yourself and your life. This creates a vicious cycle where negative thoughts generate more negative thoughts because you don't have the ability to distance yourself and observe them objectively. The devastating consequence. When you are your thoughts, you lose the ability to choose your response to life. You become reactive instead of responsive. Every situation is filtered through the prism of your habitual mental patterns, and you respond automatically based on these patterns, not on the reality of the situation. This means you're living a life predetermined by your mental conditioning, instead of living with awareness and choice in the present moment. 3. Your mind creates destructive narratives about neutral situations. The problem. Your mind takes simple, neutral life situations and constructs dramatic and negative stories about them. It's like having an internal screenwriter who specializes in turning any event into a personal tragedy. A situation that could be completely neutral, or even positive, transforms into evidence of failure, inadequacy, or unhappiness through the narrative your mind constructs around it. The revealing example: imagine eating baked beans on toast because it's what you can afford at the moment. The situation itself is neutral. You're feeding yourself, getting nutrition, satisfying a basic need. But your mind starts constructing a narrative. This is evidence of your complete failure. You can't even afford rent. You have no income. You've made a mess of your life. This is what you've been reduced to: baked beans on toast. Look at your contemporaries driving their BMWs. They have all that, and here you are. This is what life has done to me, or what I've done to mess up my life. Why this makes you unhappy? The situation itself isn't the problem. The problem is the mental commentary that accompanies it. You could have many different kinds of narratives accompanying what's happening in the present moment, and each would create a different emotional state. The failure narrative creates unhappiness. A gratitude narrative for the food would create contentment. A simplicity narrative would create peace. But you don't even realize you have a choice about which narrative to accept. The mechanics of unhappiness. Your mind has a natural negative bias. It's always looking for problems, dangers, inadequacies. This may have been useful for ancestral survival, but now it's become a constant source of unnecessary suffering. It takes any situation and finds what's wrong with it, what could be better, what's missing. This tendency transforms perfectly adequate moments into sources of discontent. The trap. You can do exactly the same thing. Eat baked beans on toast, with or without the negative narrative. With the narrative, you suffer unnecessarily. Without it, you can actually enjoy the experience. The taste isn't that bad. It's nutritious. It's satisfying your hunger. You can simply enjoy the sensory perceptions associated with it, without building a sense of self around the situation. The repetitive pattern. This doesn't just happen with food or financial situations. Your mind does this with everything. Relationships, work, physical appearance, achievements, failures. It always finds an angle to create drama, inadequacy, or unhappiness. A social encounter becomes evidence that you're socially inadequate. A mistake at work becomes proof that you're incompetent. A romantic rejection becomes confirmation that you're unlovable. The hidden reality. Most life situations are neutral. They simply are what they are. The emotional charge, the dramatic meaning, the existential importance, all of this is added by your mental narrative. When you realize this, you can start questioning these stories instead of automatically accepting them as truth. The liberation. Understanding that you can experience the same situation with completely different levels of happiness depending on the story you tell yourself about it is revolutionary. The baked beans on toast example shows this perfectly. The same meal can be experienced as evidence of failure and cause suffering, or it can be experienced as simple nourishment and bring no suffering at all. The difference isn't in the beans. It's in the narrative. 4. You fight against what is, living in the gap of suffering. The problem. Your mind is constantly arguing with present reality, saying, this shouldn't be happening, things should be different, this isn't fair, this shouldn't be like this. You live in a state of constant resistance to the present moment, always fighting what's happening now. as if your mental resistance could magically change reality. Why this makes you unhappy? Suffering is born in the gap between what is and what your mind says should be. You're always fighting the present moment, creating constant internal tension. It's like being in a civil war within yourself, where part of you is experiencing reality and another part is rejecting that same reality. The formula of suffering: current reality. What's happening now? You're waiting at the airline counter. There's a delay. The employee is being slow. Mental expectation. How you think it should be. It should be fast, efficient, no delays. Gap between the two. You're suffering, irritation, frustration, anger. Buddha was already talking about this. Suffering arises in the gap between the isness of things in this moment and arguing with the isness of things in this moment. The ignored inevitability. This seems so obvious, but it's not obvious to most humans. The inevitability of what is already the case now. This moment is as it is. Period. Your resistance to it doesn't change anything. It just adds unnecessary suffering to the experience. It's like trying to push a wall with your forehead. You'll only hurt yourself, the wall won't move. The illusion of control. Your mind creates the illusion that by arguing with reality, complaining mentally, resisting what's happening, you're exercising some kind of control or power over the situation. In reality, you're just wearing yourself out emotionally. There are situations where action is possible and necessary, but even in those situations, this moment is still as it is. You can take action, but first you need to accept the starting point, present reality. The destructive pattern. You're constantly imposing a narrative on reality that says, no, this shouldn't be like this. You're in traffic. There shouldn't be so much traffic. You're sick. I shouldn't be sick. Someone treats you badly. This person shouldn't act like this. You make a mistake, I shouldn't have done this. It's raining when you wanted sun. It shouldn't be raining. Each of these thoughts creates a small dose of suffering, and they accumulate throughout the day. The liberating alternative. When you internally align yourself with this inevitable moment, when you stop fighting what is already the case, immediate peace becomes available. This doesn't mean you become passive or don't take action when necessary. It means you stop adding unnecessary mental resistance to your life experience. The truth about time. The next moment is a different thing, but when the next moment comes, it will be now, of course. There is no next moment except as a thought in the head. Where is the future? You've never experienced it. You can't. It's impossible. And yet humans think about the future more than the present moment. They want to get to the future because they don't want what is. They believe some kind of liberation or fulfillment will come next, always missing the isness of things. The practical application. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or not working to improve your circumstances. It means recognizing that in this moment, things are as they are, and your resistance to that fact only adds suffering without changing anything. From a place of acceptance of what is, you can then take wise action if action is needed. But the action comes from clarity and presence, not from resistance and suffering. 5. You live in the future, rejecting the present. The problem. You think more about the future than about the present moment. Your mind is constantly projected forward, always believing that happiness, fulfillment, success, or solution will come later, tomorrow, when I get that thing, when the situation changes, when I have more money, when I find the right person, when I get the dream job. You live in a state of constant anticipation, treating the present as merely an obstacle to reaching the desired future. Why this makes you unhappy? You're always rejecting the now because you want to get to the later. But the future never comes. When it arrives, it becomes present again, and your mind is already projected to the next future. This creates an infinite cycle where you're never satisfied with where you are, always believing that real life, good life, is somewhere ahead in time. The temporal illusion. You have never experienced the future and never will. Only now exists, but you spend your whole life trying to escape from it. Your mind has created such a convincing illusion about time that you really believe you can live in the future. But think about it. All your experiences, all your moments of joy, sadness, success, failure, love, loss, everything happened in the present. The future is just a mental construction, a story you tell yourself. The escape mechanism. When you don't want what is, your mind automatically projects to the future. When I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. When I lose weight, then I'll feel good about myself. When I find the ideal partner, then my life will make sense. When I get more money, then I'll have security. Each of these projections is a way of rejecting the present moment and seeking salvation in an imaginary time. The existential procrastination trap. You're essentially procrastinating your own life. Instead of living now, you're waiting to live later. It's as if you're saying, I'll start really living when conditions are perfect. But conditions are never perfect, and even when you get some of the things you wanted, your mind has already created a new list of conditions that need to be met before you can really be happy. The when-then addiction. Your mind is addicted to the when-then formula. When I have this, then I'll be happy. When I achieve that, then I'll feel fulfilled. When this situation changes, then I'll find peace. This addiction keeps you always in a state of lack, always feeling like something is missing, always believing you don't have what you need to be happy now. The loss of the only real moment. While you're living in the imaginary future, you're missing the only moment that actually exists, this one. And this moment contains everything you need to be complete. Not because it's perfect or because it has everything you want, but because it's the only place where life happens. It's the only place where you can experience joy, peace, love, creativity, connection. The liberating truth. When you realize there's no life in the future, that all life happens now, you can stop postponing your happiness. You can stop treating the present like a waiting room for real life and start recognizing that this is real life. The future you're waiting for is just a mental fantasy. But this moment is real, alive, vibrant, full of possibilities. The final irony. The only way to create a better future is to be totally present now. When you stop resisting the present and align with it, you can take conscious and effective action. Paradoxically, the more you accept the present, the more power you have to influence the future. But this power comes from presence, not from mental projection. The deeper understanding. This isn't about giving up goals or not planning for the future. It's about recognizing that your primary relationship is with this moment, and any action you take toward future goals can only happen now. When you're present, your actions are more effective, your decisions are clearer, and you're actually more likely to create the future you want. But you do it from presence, not from escape. The final test. 95% of your unhappiness, practical experiment. The next time you feel irritation, anger, sadness, or any form of unhappiness, ask yourself this question. Is this caused by the situation itself, or by what my mind is telling me about the situation? Result. In 95% of cases, you'll discover that it's not the situation making you unhappy. It's the mental commentary about the situation. Conclusion. Your thoughts are not you. They are just mental noise that you've learned to take very seriously. When you recognize this, you can begin to free yourself from the prison of your own mind and find peace in the present moment, exactly as it is.